Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Dubaradino, and I'm the Commercial Business Director for Cosentino North America. And thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about installing for sustainability in today's environment. We are very fortunate to have a star-studded group of members on our panel today, starting with Steve Modemeyer. He's a principal at Collins Worman with over 30 years of experience leading organizations to develop and put in place sustainable and resilient programs. Also, Steve's company, Collins Worman, also has a sister company called Sustainable Living Innovations that Cosentino has had a good fortune of working with that has really turned construction around and upside down, and we'll explain. So, Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
Suzanne Drake is a senior designer at Revel Architecture and Design for over 20 years. She has worked as an interior designer focused on sustainability. She's also written a book called EcoSoul, Save the Planet and Yourself by Rethinking Your Everyday Habits, published in 2013. The premise of the book, happy people live more lightly on the planet. Please welcome Suzanne.
Hi.
Carlo Gatti is Business Development Manager at Keith Panel Systems out of Vancouver, Washington. He has over 20 years experience with KPS as their Business Development Manager. KPS installs facades, and they have to figure out how to make a sustainable design work. And Carlo, over the time, has had to work with he works with KPS and in the very innovative company to make things happen in a sustainable environment. Please welcome Carlo Gatti to the panel. So having said that, I'd like each one of the members of the panel to just talk a little bit about themselves, their background, and how sustainability is part of what they do. Starting with Steve, please.
Hi there. Hello, everyone. My name's Steve Modemeyer, as Steve said. I work at Collins Worman, which is an architecture and planning firm based in Seattle, and I lead the planning practice for the company. Back in 2008, our company spun off a new company called Sustainable Living Innovations, and the idea was to create a super sustainable manufacturer of high-rise apartment houses. So it uses a catalog of standardized parts, off-site fabrication, and a factory direct supply chain. So basically what SLI has done in the last 12 years is gotten over 100 international patents and developed this ecosystem of suppliers, develop buildings and deliver buildings, complete buildings that are super sustainable and great to live in. And one of the things that when you look around in the world around us, we have all these symptoms of things that aren't going well. We have climate change, we have housing affordability issues, and we have social and economic inequality. And those things are symptoms of systems that aren't delivering the outcomes that we want. And that was one of the challenges, or why we developed SLI, was instead of trying to put green things on top of the existing system for building buildings, we went back and said, how can we build buildings so super efficiently and super sustainable from the inside out? So that's what we did, and we created, we have a lot in the pipeline now, and we'll talk more about it soon.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Suzanne, could you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing?
Sure. As you mentioned, well, I'm Suzanne Drake, and I'm working with Revel now. I have over 20 years in interior design, and I've spent a big chunk of that in healthcare environments, hospitals and clinical spaces, doing interior design in those environments. And that's really where I first became aware of the health issues associated with interior products that we commonly specify. And that kind of set me on a road to really being aware of that and learning as much as I could about how could I make the impact that I have as a specifier and as a designer be as positive as possible, both for the users of the space, of the a project that I'm working on, any specific project, but also the people who are impacted by the products that we specify. It doesn't end with the users. It includes installers, but also the people who make those products. Where do the raw materials come from? All of these things have a much bigger impact than just that final installation. And I think that's really informed how I approach sustainability. And the other aspect is working within sustainability. As an interior designer, I often feel like I don't have as much impact as, because I'm not developing high performance building envelopes and things like that. But I have found that I can have a really important impact through the material specification. So that's really what I want to focus on. And that idea of health and wellness in spaces is, to me, very much part and parcel, very much a part of sustainability as a whole. And that's how we approach it at Revel, is really thinking about health and wellness from that user standpoint, but also at the larger supply chain scale and end of life of product and project scale. So we're trying to realize our responsibility at a larger scale than just that immediate project.
That's great.
And that's what I'd like to talk about more later.
Well, thanks, Suzanne. Carlo, please introduce yourself.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Carlo Gatti, and I'm with Keith Panel Systems. We're based in Vancouver, British Columbia. I want to thank Cosentino for setting up this panel discussion today, and for all the audience members who took the time to join. My background is in architectural and building engineering technology. I've been with Keith Panel Systems now for 20 years, and my prime focus is to assist architects, general contractors, developers, and owners with the design, fabrication, and installation of high-performance rain screen wall panel systems. And we put a lot of importance into using sustainable products. So we try to associate ourselves with facade products that are what I like to call life of the building type products that reduce the carbon footprint of our planet. And in addition to that, today, one of the things that I would like to speak about is our KPS ThermoSmart clip, which is a product that helps improve the thermal performance of exterior facades, thereby reducing the energy requirements of buildings. So I'm happy to answer any questions that may arise today from the fabricator installer's perspective in producing and installing high performance facade systems.
Well, thanks, Carlo. That's great. So the first question I have is, where do you begin in order to make a project sustainable? And I think I'll start with Steve Modemeyer.
Well, like I said, we redesigned the whole system. So we really looked at back in before 2008, we designed a number of high-rise apartment houses, and as we watched them being built, you could just see that there was a lot of inefficiency kind of hardwired into the way that we build buildings in a sequential manner. Each time someone gets to a floor, they're doing the same thing they did the floor below, but they're starting like it was the first time. And we just realized that there was room for efficiency. And if you think about what it costs to buy a jumbo jet, it's about what it costs to buy a really large apartment house, a high-rise apartment house. And yet we were still kind of hand building those apartment houses like we did nearly 100 years before. But if it's a jumbo jet, then they have all these offsite suppliers that build to very tight specs, and then they deliver the pieces. And as the jet goes through the factory, it gets assembled, well, in the case of Boeing, in 9 days to put a 737 together. So we're not doing buildings in 9 days, but we can go a lot better than 18 months or 2 years if we kind of get all the pieces identified up front. And then so what we end up doing is we design these pieces and panels that fit together, basically snap together. Everything is pre-designed, and it's a catalog of parts. And then when we and for a while, we were just trying to sell those parts to developers, and developers were like, "Well, I want my markup, and everybody else needs their markup." And so we ended up realizing our system was fantastic, but it wouldn't really make it work unless we could deliver a completed building. So we, in a sense, reinvented the company, Sustainable Living Innovations, to where now we're selling completed buildings just like Boeing would sell a jet. We're selling a completed building that has all of the specified parts that we've worked with a number of OEMs to create, and then we deliver those buildings. Each one's attuned to the site, but we end up creating this much more accelerated process. And by accelerating it, it costs less. It literally costs less to make, and it also costs less to finance because you're only in the field half as long. And the parts that we can specify can be extremely meet high tolerances. So one of the things that we're able to do by addressing those issues I mentioned before, climate change, housing affordability, and social and economic inequity, is build a building like this. This is 303 battery. If you look at this image, it's just draped with solar panels. It's going to be probably, if it isn't going to be, it will be one of the first, if not the first, net zero high-rise apartment house in the world. It's got solar panels on the roof, solar panels on the exterior wall there to the south, and then also on the railings. That building uses the energy use is 60% below conventional just by the way we designed the building in the first place. And inside of it, if you look at this next image that's of the kind of the inside of the building, a number of the systems that we placed in there, for example, heat recovery. When you take a shower, the hot water goes down to the basement. We pull out 90% of that heat and then reuse it for tomorrow's hot water. The solar panels, of course, we use natural ventilation. We have floor-to-ceiling window walls that open up across half of the unit, and then a full deck on each unit, full unit size. We have gray water system in the basement. So when the shower water goes down to the basement, it's treated and then used to flush the toilets, and we reduce water use by 33% that way. And by the panelized system that we use, the building itself weighs 1/5 of a traditional building. So it's only about 20 pounds per square foot, which is 1/5 of a normal building weight. And by using lighter materials, it actually means that our structural systems don't have to be as robust as a similar building that same height. I mean, they're very robust, but I'm saying they don't need to be as oversized as they might be otherwise. So we end up with this building that is very likely to qualify as a zero carbon building under the International Living Future Institute's approach. So by designing the system, working with a range of partners, and then creating a method to install it that's highly replicable and super sustainable, we're going to start delivering these buildings with extremely low operating costs because of all those sustainability features, which actually helps in the bottom line. It increases the value of the building to the tenant. And then one last thing that we've really committed to is affordability. So there's in that building that you just were looking at, that's 115 stories rather, and 112 units. Of those units, 27 of them are kind of guaranteed for lower income families. But when you look at market rate, 90%, workforce housing, which is 100% and below median income, 90% of that units in that building will be for workforce housing. And so we're ending up with, luxury units in some, but all the units are treated the same, but we still have from a quarter to almost 90% that are workforce affordable, super sustainable, really low operating costs, and a really long life because it's very high quality construction methods that we use.
That's great. Suzanne, from an interior designer's perspective, when Steve was talking about the interior of the building, you take a different approach when you're looking at the sustainability of a healthcare project versus maybe a residential high-rise, and also just in general, how do you approach it from an interior designer's perspective?
Right. Well, the approach is probably the same regardless of project type, because you really just want to have a mindset of what are the goals of the project, and having open communication with the client and with the whole project team so everybody's on the same page. I see a lot of good intentions get wiped away midway or further along in the project because they weren't either not clearly communicated as to why it was important to the project, or they just were not supported by everybody who needs to support the whole project as we go. And I think we'll probably get into some examples of that later. But in general, the approach would be open communication, be really clear about the goals, and talk about with the client what are goals around sustainability. I know sometimes we are reluctant to talk about things that we're not fully informed of ourselves. So maybe certain people on the project team are not as well versed in all the angles of sustainability, and they don't want to appear like they don't know what they're talking about. So they just avoid the conversation. All the way through to having super experts and really talking a lot of technicalities, and then clients get a little bit worried, is that going to cost me a lot more money, and things like that. So we just want to have this open conversation, get things out on the table, and then go from there. Because I think the other thing is that we want to avoid is really not respecting the client's wishes. So we want to try to meet our clients where they are, and not every client is ready to embrace every aspect of sustainability. They have other concerns as well. And so if we don't respect that and address all of their concerns and all of the goals equally well, then we don't have a repeat client, and we can't have the opportunity to do more with them later and do more on that front with them later.
Right.
So I see it very much as an education process and opportunity as we go. That's probably the very early starting point for us.
Right. Carlo, this is a good one for you. What is needed to comply with a sustainable project? And let's say you've got the drawings and you've got everything in front of you, and you're putting in a ventilated rain screen project, and you see some issues that need to be addressed. How do you approach that with an architect or an owner or both?
Right. Well, one of the first things I want to touch on is actually going back to what Steve at Collins Worman mentioned. KPS is a solutions-based company. So when we hear of innovative ideas and technologies that, such as what Steve was mentioning, we get excited about that. We want to participate, and we want to find solutions that are out of the box. So we would be the type of company that would partner to develop systems that meet those challenges. And just like Suzanne mentioned earlier, that's a big challenge for designers and owners, because there's an establishment in the industry that sort of pushes back against change, right? Because there's a fear of doing things that are outside of the norm and what construction or trade companies are accustomed to doing. So when we are approached with those challenges, I mean, we may not have the answers on day one, but we have a very talented team and with a lot of experience. So we take that experience and we apply it to address those solutions. And that's not only with in-house technical staff, but we also have a very strong relationship with structural engineers, building envelope consultants that we work with to address those issues, so that we can ensure that we are meeting the performance requirements that are laid out for the project.
Maybe I could add something to that, and maybe a little story. We had a developer that we interviewed with about 6 years ago, and Arlen Collins of Collins Worman and I went in to meet the guy. And Arlen said, and here's Steve, he's our sustainability guy and got all these great ideas. And the developer said, I'm really happy you guys are here, but I don't want any of that sustainability crap. He goes, and this was a multi-city block redevelopment. And he said, because I'm worried that the market will discount whatever I create if it has these special sustainability features. So this was 6 years ago, but now the market, which in this case would be real estate investment trusts or the large capital holders that basically end up buying and holding these buildings, they're all doing ESGs, environmental sustainability and governance strategies, and those are really being adopted broadly. And there's a lot of the smart money, a lot of the big money that now expects and is requiring that the climate change be integrated in, that social justice be integrated in. And so I think there has been a shift in which will allow it for a developer who is typically going to those markets for some of that money to pay for it, because they rarely pay for all of it with their own checkbook. While when the big money is now saying, look, we expect and want this more sustainable kind of work, then I think it's going to be easier to shift. And that's one advantage of kind of taking the approach that we did of looking at the whole system instead of just the design part. Was we're now looking at, well, how do these things get financed and what are the requirements? And so you start understanding how they all fit together, and then there's ways to interject to make a more outcome that's more appropriate. And so I think, if anything, it's ironic, but in the last 6 months, it seems more like the sustainable outcomes are going to be preferred more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I have another thing to add to that. You asked how to comply with a sustainable project. I would say, I think we should approach every project as a sustainable project. There's always something that we can be doing to make improvements, sort of under the radar, so to speak, that, especially in my part of the project, there's a lot of mainstream products out there that are perfectly suitable, lower carbon, embodied carbon, lower toxicity, and those types of things. So I think we should look at every project as an opportunity, and we should be applying every strategy that we can on every project.
Right. I really agree with that.
So here's a very specific question I wanted to ask Carlo, because I know your involvement in this is very particular to facades, but you usually can add some expertise regarding the thermal insulation of the building. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Right. Well, for those in the audience who are familiar with exterior insulated wall systems, you would know that traditionally what had been used in the past were continuous bands of galvanized steel Z-girts to support the panel system, and the mineral wool insulation was fitted in between these horizontal bands or vertical bands of continuous steel girt. Well, unfortunately, that method of install created significant cold bridging in the insulation layer. And what that does is it significantly reduces the effective R value of the insulation. So we are now seeing that continuous Z-girt approach going by the wayside, and now the use of non-continuous, what's commonly referred to as thermal clips. And there are a number of them on the market, some very well known because they're heavily marketed. We decided to put in to develop our own. One of the reasons for that, well, actually there was two principal reasons. Number one, it was very expensive to buy these commodity clips that were marketed by companies who developed them. So we thought we could, reduce costs by producing them ourselves. But also we saw some flaws in some of the clips on the market. We were concerned with combustibility. So we wanted to develop a clip where we wouldn't have to worry about a fire event in the rain screen cavity potentially weakening the clip. So what may seem counterintuitive is our clip is actually all metal. The clip that's up on the screen right now, we call it our KPS ThermoSmart clip. This is our second version of the clip. I don't know if you can see it there. The clip has two components. There's a back angle, which gets fastened to the substrate, and then there's a plate that attaches to that back component, and that plate is adjustable so that we can plumb out the wall. In the first version of our clip, when we were designing it, we thought, well, if this is going to perform, we have to put a thermal break between the back half of the clip and the front half of the clip to mitigate cold bridging. So we had this polyethylene separator, structural separator, and it worked. We got good results back from the thermal energy modeling. But it was very expensive to produce that clip. And one thing that we learned in working with the building envelope consultant and their thermal energy modeling software is what was a greater factor in improving the thermal performance was not so much what the clip was made out of, but if you could increase the clip spacing. So in other words, have fewer clips on the wall. So with that new understanding, we developed the second version of our clip, which eliminated that thermal break, but helped us create a much stronger clip, which we could then space out further on the wall. And what we saw were even greater results, even better results in thermal performance. The 2.0 version is all aluminum. So the back angle is aluminum and the front angle is, the front plate is aluminum. As we're always trying to improve, we've made another change to that. The all aluminum clip did very well in achieving ASHRAE 90.1 thermal performance standards for various climate zones. In the Pacific Northwest, that standard was achieving R15, effective R15.6. And we were able to achieve that quite easily with 4 inches of mineral wool and that clip. But now we're starting to see even stricter or more aggressive thermal performance standards brought to us by step code and passive house type designs. So we needed to make further improvements. And one thing that we learned is that stainless steel is a very low conductor versus aluminum. So what we just recently made a change in is the back half of our clip is now stainless steel. And we're seeing improvements of up to effective R2 in the same, with using the same insulation thickness and clip spacing. So, with our clip, the reason that it's been so successful is it was developed from a fabricator's point of view. So we brought our fabricators and installers to the table, and we got their input. And because it's adjustable, it increases speed of construction, lowering cost. It's strong. We can increase the clip spacing, thereby improving thermal performance. And we're continuing to innovate it to get higher R values. And once again, because we control it in-house and develop it in-house, we can offer it at a much lower cost than some of the commercially marketed clips out there. So that's one of the things that KPS is doing from a thermal performance perspective to improve sustainability and improve the thermal performance of buildings.
Yeah, that's great, Carlo, because that's a very innovative and improving way that you guys have tackled that problem. I wanted to go to Suzanne on this. When you're looking at it, the design itself, and knowing cost savings is a priority in different projects, how do you find a balance between sustainability and savings when you're going with the client?
That is the age-old question. And I have to always remind people, both clients and the design team, a lot of times, is we can build really expensive conventional projects. So we can also build more economical projects in a conventional manner. So the same applies to using a more sustainable mindset. So the trick is just knowing what are the goals. Where can we use things more off the shelf? As I mentioned, a lot of products, a lot of mainstream, more commonly available products are doing so much better from a materials standpoint, embodied carbon, and things like that. So that makes that aspect a lot easier. Where there is something that might be a little bit unusual, then we can decide how important is that to the project. Where can we save a little bit somewhere else in order to make this thing work? So that's usually how we approach. I mean, like the image that you're looking at, that's a totally custom design, incorporating biophilic feature of indoor living plants, the wood paneling, some steel accents, some painted metal accents on a concrete wall. These are all design elements that work together. The client liked the overall look, and the whole thing fell into budget. I couldn't point at any specific thing and say, oh, that's more expensive than usual. I mean, it's a custom design. What would be considered usual? So I think there's lots of room for bringing in projects within budget, from without even touching the building systems, so to speak. I think you probably have more opportunity for savings and being able to sell a specific strategy on the idea of savings through, because a building is constantly using resources. But in an interior installation where it's kind of a one-time installation, we just have to make sure it hits the mark on all the goals of the project. And we find that we don't usually have too much pushback. It's more from an aesthetic standpoint. Are we meeting the goals? Are we meeting the functional requirements of the space? And are we able to make it beautiful at the same time? We can definitely do that in almost any budget.
That's great.
I think if I could comment on that, Steve, one of the reasons, one of the things that was frustrating to me was this idea that, well, I might do something sustainable if it costs less, and meaning getting that message. And one of the reasons, for example, like if we burn natural gas, that might be inexpensive as long as you don't count the impacts of climate change from burning natural gas. And so a lot of the things that are less healthy for us or that pollute water or the atmosphere, those have high costs. They're just not borne by the product, and maybe they're borne by other people. So when to me, I've always basically said the challenge is, can I do the same or better levels of service for the same or less cost? So maybe it won't cost any less, but it'll be way more sustainable and meet more of our values by selecting a different product or in a different approach than you might conventionally do. And so, yeah, I agree. We can run up the budget and we can also be unreasonable. But I think having a target where you're not going to save necessarily any money on first cost, or you might save money on operating costs, but you need a model to recoup that. But it doesn't need to be less expensive. It just needs to meet more of our broader values.
Steve, I think this is a good follow-up to that. For installation of materials that help provide an overall sustainable building, have you had to incorporate any additional design considerations to accommodate that sustainable product or concept? I mean, you mentioned in your building and you showed how we were recycling the water, for example, but.
Yeah, I think part of it, we've worked with a number of the suppliers to create custom parts for our system. So we've got the lighting system is made just for us, and it ends up, we're lighting up our rooms for 2 watts per square foot. We have a really innovative air conditioning system in each unit that is 3.5 inches deep and uses 50 watts. It's basically half-ton cooling system. So we have basically created new products to meet the specifications of our kit of parts. And the reason we've had partners willing to partner with us on that is that we're building a system that can be replicated in multiple buildings. So it's not a one-time solution for this one building. This is something that can be done over and over. For the gray water system, for example, we worked with Arenco to develop a really low energy gray water treatment system that's on a skid, designed for our buildings, and it's going to cost a lot less than if we custom designed one for each facility or not. So yeah, I think that's one of the beauties of starting at the beginning too, is that we can be really conscious and look everywhere in the entire system. The clips that we buy from KPS, or the interiors that we design, or the other mechanical systems or whatever, those all can be, we either get our own made to fit our system, or we figure out how to accommodate them into our system. And if they don't work, then we don't use them. But for example, we have Toto bathroom fixtures, which are surprisingly expensive if you were to go buy one, yet we're putting them in our low income units because they fit with our system the way that they were designed. So it ends up being, Toto can sell a really nice bathroom package. We can buy one and then we can afford it because we don't have to change anything to make it work with our system.
Yeah. Suzanne and then Carl, I'd like you both to answer this question. A lot of times you've specified something or a concept or a product and it's not available, or the GC has decided to substitute something. How do you deal with that, both from not just the specification stage, but from the final product you're trying to provide to the owner?
Right. Well, there's a couple of ways. One is we hope that the way our specifications are written is that any substitutions or alternates that the contractor wants to propose needs to meet the same requirements as the original product. So if we've done our job in selecting something, for example, that has a health product declaration to show that it is a lower toxicity product, or it has a declare label, or something of that nature, then we would hold the proposed substitution to the same value and say, well, as long as it carries those things, then we'll consider it. So that's one way we can make sure that our design intent is maintained. The other aspect could be from an aesthetic or functional standpoint, performance. Maybe there's something that product does that the alternate can't do, and so it's not really an equal, and we can talk about it with the client as to why it's necessary to go with the original selection. Let's see, there is one other thing I wanted to mention, just flew out of my head. And ultimately, I think with substitutions and alternates, it really is a conversation. Why is it being substituted? Is it a lead time issue or something of that nature? Do we need to reselect something? Can we work together with the contractor to solve the problem at hand? So we do try to make it a conversation and not just do what I said sort of thing.
Right. Carla, from your standpoint, when you're installing a facade project, how do you address those issues?
Yeah. Well, one of the advantages of working with KPS in pre-tender during the design phase is we're not a product rep. We're a fabricator installer that has 30 plus years working with a variety of facade products. And what we do is we do our due diligence before we offer the product as part of one of our high performance systems, to make sure that we're comfortable that it's going to perform, and it's going to meet sustainability requirements. So oftentimes, if a product is specified an architect and there's a cost concern and there's a request for an alternate or something like that happens, oftentimes we have something already that we've worked with, another product that we've worked with that could be a suitable and we already have the confidence that it's going to meet the performance requirements at a lower cost. Otherwise, I would reiterate what Suzanne said. If it's a product we're not familiar with, we just don't simply agree, okay, we'll install it. We want to make sure that what we install is going to perform, that it meets the test criteria required by the specification, and that we have confidence that we're going to deliver something that the owner and architect are going to be proud of. So from our perspective as people, because we're not a product, we have lots of experience working with a variety of materials that might be a good cost saving. That's another reason why a lot of architects and owners and developers like to approach very early on, is because we can give them the straight goods on a variety of products, the pros and cons that we as a fabricator installer can identify. And they know that they're getting the full truth, and they may not be getting too much of a push from a singular product rep on a product. So hopefully that answers your question on how we deal with alternates.
Yeah, no, thanks, Carlo. I think the next question, Steve, moving to the future, what sustainable elements become more common in installations at this point?
That's a good one. I'm drawing a blank. What's going to become more common? I think, the ones that we've talked about, one of the challenges that we have is that the costs can be offset in the operation. So if the capital cost to create the building is X and the operating costs are Y, it might be a different party that ends up paying for Y. So the person that's putting the capital up might want to, lower the performance of the building because they're not penalized as much as they might gain by creating better performance. But if you start looking at the operating costs, particularly with some of these more advanced sustainable systems, those operating costs end up returning real value if you have hardwired in these really great systems. So I think that one of the things is that we're going to have to look more thoroughly at what it costs to operate these buildings, and then the buyers of buildings are going to have to let the people that develop buildings know, we're going to value your building on what it costs us to operate it, not what you think it costs you to build it or some other market number, because I think that'll be a huge shift. The other thing is, I think that we can have, we are going to have a lot more smart systems that interface with the users, that operate the blinds, where the building itself will be kind of self-healing in the sense where it'll operate itself with artificial intelligence systems and sensors all over. We have hundreds of sensors in our new buildings, and a really smart system to operate them. And we're also even signing contracts about how well they'll perform over time, not only for a regulatory entity, but for the owners. So I think that maybe it's almost kind of changes more in the expectations and in the contracts and in the performance over time. That to me is something that needs to move more into everyday practice and is still a little bit unusual.
Okay. So we have our first audience question, and it is, what process do you use to select sustainable products? And Suzanne, you pretty much touched on this when you talked about declare labels and such. Would you like to maybe just speak a little bit more about that? Well, I guess I'll move to the next one. When you get your mic on, Suzanne, let's see. I think you gotta get on Skype there and click on the mic.
There we go. Can
There
you hear
we
me
go.
now?
There we go.
That was odd. Sorry. So to answer your question about products, having the resources and knowing where to look is really important and can save a lot of time. And to that extent, in terms of what kind of products, there are several places where you can start looking. There's databases being compiled of healthier materials, of lower embodied carbon materials. And some of those databases include the Mindful Materials Library. You can also go to the database for health product declarations, HPD repository. And there's a couple of carbon related websites that are starting to compile specific products or calculators to help work find those types of products. EPDs, environmental product declarations, also report embodied carbon on specific products. So these are all good things to be looking for, and you can search by EPD or HPD when you're on a website of your favorite manufacturer, or you can go directly to those databases and sort and try to find things that are already there. So I would suggest doing that.
Okay.
And if I can just jump in real quick, since I have a second, you had asked earlier what the future types of things would be more common. And I would say, I would like to add just under the idea of biophilia, access to daylight and access to outdoor spaces are really important, and especially in this exact environment of COVID-19 and living through a pandemic, spaces that have that outdoor access are much more usable now than places that don't. So I think that that's going to be a big feature that we're going to see more of. It's already popular, but it's kind of like a nice to have. But I think we're going to see that more as a must have.
That's an excellent point. Great pictures too.
Yeah, I could add to that too. As Suzanne mentioned, she's worked a lot in medical design in our company as well. And so you have lots of special ventilation systems for hospital rooms and surgery centers and things. And we're just going to have to bring some of that same sort of mindset to how we retrofit offices and or build new residential facilities or conference rooms, so that we're using air pressure differential and air movement and floor-based exhaust systems, so that we're reducing the likelihood of a spread of COVID. It just seems like it's going to be around for several years at a minimum, and maybe longer. So we might want to have building systems that reduce the possibility of spread of infection. And as it turns out, not catching a cold would be just another great benefit, even if it isn't a pandemic.
The next question is, does your librarian keep a distinctive area of products that are sustainable in your firm?
That's a really good question. Right now, no, we don't. And I have been in libraries in the past where that has been the case. And I think that was kind of a necessary step when there weren't that many products available. I think now I think we can start getting away from that. And I think any library can be structured to highlight and put forward the preferred products, so to speak. And again, I might use the mindful materials method, where there's products. If a product is in that database, it means it has some sort of transparency documentation. And that just means that while it may not be the cleanest product, it at least is reporting what the products are made out of. And that is the first step. How can we pick healthier products if we don't know what we're already using and we can't compare? So the Mindful Materials system is the online database, but you can also download stickers and materials to help identify those same products on your library shelves. So designers can come in and look for that notation and know that they can they can just skip the rest of the stuff and go right to the goods.
Yeah. This is a general question to anyone. With busy schedules and ever-evolving technology, how do you keep up with learning about the latest energy-efficient products?
Well, I can jump in. I mean, I think it's everybody's duty to just try and stay informed. There's a lot of great resources available online where people are making that effort. So just read the blogs, sign up to the newsletters, find out about innovations that are happening around the world. There's a lot of great info out there, and it may not have the final solution, but it can inspire, right? So I can say from KPS's standpoint, we've seen ideas that aren't necessarily the solution to our problem, but there's something in there that makes a lot of sense, right? And that inspires us to make innovations on our product. So just get out there, be informed, go on social media, sign up for the blogs, the newsletters, and see what other people are doing. Collectively, it'll lead to great things.
Great.
I could comment on Carlo's point too. He mentioned, around the world, I really find that there's a lot of thoughtful design going on in Europe and Asia that we Americans tend to miss. And we think that we kind of are the center of the universe when there's really stuff going on. And so I've been lucky enough to work internationally for a number of years. And so checking out those international sources for innovation will really give us Americans kind of early insight on what our projects are emerging, which ones can be integrated in. And so definitely I've worked with manufacturers in Japan and Singapore and in Germany and Sweden because they have really great solutions, and they can work with us if we find out about them and then integrate them in.
That's great. Next question. Do investors, buyers view a building being LEED certified or having a low carbon footprint as an added value?
That's my experience. There's, portfolios that real estate investment trusts use that they fill up with LEED gold buildings, and then I mentioned earlier the ESGs, which are kind of these kind of global goals for environment, sustainability, and governance. Those are more and more being applied to the portfolios that these investors have. I think BlackRock was there. Were they the one recently in the last couple of weeks mentioned that they're, hardwiring climate change into their...
They did, yeah. Mm-hmm. I saw that too. Okay, here's another question. How do you see the green trend developing? Is it here to stay, and will there be a next phase of this trend? That's interesting.
I'd like to take that. I definitely think it's here to stay, and I think that the next phase of it is we're kind of already in, which is really focusing that lens of sustainability down at the product level. So I've talked a lot about healthier materials and things like that, and the only way we can know that we're making healthier materials is to understand what we have already been making things from, and understanding how those product choices and those manufacturing choices are impacting the planet and the people who live around the factories. I'm sure some of you have heard of Cancer Alley, which is a generic term, but if you Google that, you'll see it's focused a lot on the industrial areas of Louisiana along the Mississippi River, where the people who have to live around that heavy industrial area are bearing the brunt of the toxic emissions coming from those plants. And Steve alluded to that earlier as well. So I think the next phase of sustainability is really starting to embrace the social impacts of the decisions that we're making on products and manufacturing and everything.
Right. Okay, here's the final question. is there any other certifications besides LEED that you think architects and designers and developers should keep an eye out for?
Well,
I know that the living building challenge is, as a fabricator installer, I don't know how much more it will get pushed over time, but living building challenge has been something we've been faced with, and quite simply, it establishes a list of what they call red list items. So those are hazardous materials, hazardous ingredients, which they identify and which we are now mindful of when we look at new products. We want to know if they contain any of these red list items. So living building challenge may be one of those other efforts.
Yes, I would add also the WELL standard, which is very much user oriented. It's centered on people and health within the built environment. So there's some overlap with LEED, but it really is meant to go hand in hand. So it's a different angle. And then there's also Fitwell, which is really geared toward any space whatsoever, any commercial space. And that is also focused on the user and more in terms of a safety and activity level, which is interesting, is trying to impact people's natural tendencies, I guess, to gravitate towards sedentariness. But Fitwell is a one I've been seeing a lot, especially across real estate portfolios, because it's easy to implement. You can really roll it out across multiple buildings. It's a fairly low cost. It's very straightforward to do. I'm working on a certification for a client right now, so it's definitely out there and worth keeping an eye on.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. Okay. So we're going to move on to final remarks. I want to really thank our panel members. This has been a fantastic discussion among the three of you. And I'd like you each to, if you'd like, to make a final statement, starting with Carlo.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Steve. Again, thanks very much for setting up the discussion. I think it was really productive. It was nice to meet Steve Modemeyer and Suzanne Drake. I have a feeling I may reach out to you in the future to talk a little bit more, because you mentioned a few things that really interested me. Just from a representative of KPS, I just want to invite the audience members, if there was anything I said today that sparked your interest and you'd like to follow up on, please reach out to me. I'm happy to assist. Once again, KPS specializes in the design, fabrication, and installation of high-performance architectural facade systems, specifically rain screen systems. And I just want to offer my assistance to anyone in the audience that would like to pick up on the conversation. Other than that, thank you very much. I really enjoyed participating.
Thank you, Carlo. Suzanne, would you go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Cosentino, for hosting this and giving me an opportunity to chat. I'm here at Revel in San Francisco, and just wanted to mention, because I don't think I did before, that while I personally have a healthcare background, Revel Interiors does do healthcare as well as office space, and some retail and hospitality. So it's just been a joy to be here, and I really appreciate being able to kind of spread the message. And thank you again for giving us this platform.
Well, thanks, Suzanne. Appreciate you joining us. And Steve.
Yeah, Steve, again, I agree. Cosentino, thank you so much for hosting this. And I really did enjoy Carlo and Suzanne's comments, and I learned a lot from them. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate. We're in this time of a lot of uncertainty in the world, where not only do we have a pandemic to deal with, we have an economy that's kind of looks like it's teetering. So how are we going to move forward together? And I really think that there's, those three symptoms that I mentioned at the beginning of, climate change, housing affordability, and social and economic equity. Those three things are kind of pushing us in a sustainable direction and a systems-based change. And I think that that is enabled by the fact that people are going to kind of be figuring out how to dig their way out of this economic and health issue. And it's also in a way enabled by people like me with 30 years of experience kind of moving into the sunset, and a whole new generation coming that expects sustainability and expects climate change to be right. And they expect social and economic equity as at least part of what we're all about. So I'm really excited about the future. Really excited about the opportunity to collaborate with folks like Suzanne and Carlo and you, Steve. And I really appreciate the audience for taking the time to talk with us today.
Well, thank you, panelists. And that's all we have. This is Steve Dubaradino with Cosentino North America. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us. Thank you, Steve Modemeyer, Suzanne Drake, Carlo Gatti, for being part of this panel. It was a great discussion. Everyone have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.